on the 6th of May, 2023, about 18 million of us turned on our TVs. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets in London, and just over 2,000 people crammed into Westminster Abbey to witness the coronation of King Charles as he was coronated or became King of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. And I remember I was painting my hallway at the time, and I had it on my computer streaming to watch. And it was it was a sight. It was actually amazing the stuff that was going on. And as Brits, we're not really at the forefront of many things apart from drinking tea and complaining about the weather. But when it comes to ceremony, we really know how to pull out all the stops. We know how to do ceremony. And here's a bunch of stats that I found about, is that going to work? Is anything working this morning? Hello. There you go. Well, the guys can do it. Here's some stats I found out about the clothing that Charles had. See, the robe worn by King Charles for his coronation was an extravagant creation, as you can see. It measured over 10 feet in length, and it symbolized the vastness of his reign and the weight of his responsibilities. It was crafted from the finest fabrics imported from across the realm. The robe boasted a staggering cost of over £100,000, and it reflects the opulence and grandeur befitting a royal coronation. You know, my wife tells me off when I buy some new jeans, but at least I haven't bought a £100,000 robe. And it was adorned with over 10,000 hand-sewn pearls and gemstones. The crown on his head added an additional £5 to its weight and carried a value of more than 1 million, and it served as a dazzling emblem of his divine right to rule, apparently. Beneath the robe, layers of sumptuous silk and velvet garment, tailored to perfection, added to the ensemble's extravagance, contributing to a total attire cost exceeding £500,000, so just half £1,000,000. And the meticulous craftsmanship and attention to detail invested in every aspect of his outfit underscored the significance of the occasion, making King Charles's coronation a spectacle of unparalleled magnificence and luxury. There you go. That's just some information about the clothing, the stuff that he wore. And do you remember the chariot? Do you remember this thing as he paraded through the streets? It looks like it's made out of gold, but apparently it's made of wood and it's covered in gold leaf. It's so big and it's so heavy that it takes 8 powerful horses to drive it, to drag it. And if it was made today, it would cost in the region of £3 million. It really was this big spectacle, this big sight. And you might be sitting there as you watch this or even thinking about this now thinking, well, why? You know, why did we go to so much length, time, energy, a lot of hard work, a lot of money went into that event? Why was that? Well, without making a political statement, the reason why so much time, energy, and money went into King Charles's coronation was to make a statement. It was to say to our nation and the rest of the world to take note, because a new king is on the scene. Now, we wanted to get people's attention. Now, of course, this wasn't the first coronation that's ever happened, and it certainly won't be the last coronation. And for many people, the event sort of, you know, whilst there's loads of stuff that goes into it, sort of we're in line with what you'd expect, you know, the spectacle of a new king being coronated. You think, well, there's going to be that pomp, there's going to be that ceremony, there's going to be that opulence, there's going to be this stuff that significance, the power and the wealth of our nation. And that's what happens in these sort of things. I want to take us back to another story of another procession of a king. And this time, actually, the events are quite surprising. They're not what you'd expect for a king or a new king to do. And the events are recorded in all 4 of the Gospels in the New Testament section of our Bible. So we're going to take a look at Luke's account of what was going on. It says this: as he approached Bethpage, we were talking about Jesus, and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you why you untying it, say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it, just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they replied, "The Lord needs it." So they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. And as he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. And when he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they'd seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. You know, and just like Charles's coronation, these events are full of rich symbolism and meaning. There's so much stuff that is actually going on there to make a point. But that's probably where the comparison stops. You see, there wasn't a lot of planning, really, it doesn't seem. There's certainly not a lot of money or cost that went into Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. That's what we call it or what we refer to it. You know, actually, it seems all it needed was the loan of a young donkey. And, you know, people just put their cloaks out on the floor and on the road for Jesus to walk over. Matthew adds in a bit of extra detail for us, telling us that some people took branches and laid them down on the road as Jesus went rode in. And just imagine being there. Imagine, try and take yourself back all those years ago, and imagine what must it have been like to have been in Jerusalem at that time. You can picture the scene, perhaps. Maybe you have traveled to Jerusalem for the Jewish festival of Passover, like so many other people who are in the city at that time. You've made the pilgrimage from wherever it is that you call home to this place. And apparently, at this time in history, the population of Jerusalem was about 20,000 people. But during festivals such as Passover, it would grow to around about 180,000 people or more. And so you're there. You've made that journey from wherever it is. And perhaps you've not heard about Jesus. You've not heard about this famous or perhaps infamous Galilean rabbi. You might not have heard about who he is and the things that he's done. And you start to see and hear this sort of commotion, and you see all these people lining the streets. And if you've come from Britain, you just join because there's a queue, and you know we can't help it, can we? There's a queue. I've got to join the queue. So you have a look to see what's going on. And in the distance, you know, at the other end of the street, you can start to hear this noise, this commotion, and you can see people starting to wave coats and wave their branches around. And then you see this really strange sight. You see this guy riding down the middle of this street with all the people around them cheering and praising and singing and dancing and waving. And you see this guy on a tiny little donkey. You know, his feet are barely off the ground. Perhaps he's bending his legs so that his feet aren't scraping along the ground. And he thinks to himself, gosh, what a strange sight. Obviously, you know this is obviously some person of importance, because why else would the crowds be there? But this isn't like those other processions you've seen when Caesar or the other Roman rulers are rolled into town, and they're on those grand stallions, or perhaps they're in a fine chariot that's been pulled by horses, and they're flanked by soldiers in gleaming armor and big sharp swords and spears, basically saying to the crowd, stay away. You know, when you've seen those ceremonies, you've seen those processions, you see the power, you see the strength of these people, because they're on that big massive horse in that big gold shiny chariot, which is saying, I'm powerful, I'm rich, I'm in control. But this guy looks different. You know, he's not towering above all the other people. He's at eye level with people. In fact, he's probably lower than eye level to some people. And the crowds are crowding around, and the kids are running on, trying to climb up onto the donkey as well. And you think to yourself, gosh, this really is a strange sight. But then a bell rings in your head, and you're reminded of the words of the prophet Zechariah, who talked about this, who painted a picture of this. And it says this in chapter 9, verse 9, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. You know, this was written years and years before, and before your eyes, it's unfolding before you. You know, and just like the events of the coronation of King Charles was designed to make a statement, so too is what Jesus is doing here. It's making a statement about who he is and what he's about. He's saying for anybody to see, I'm the king. I am the Messiah, the promised one. I'm the anointed one. And perhaps you could think to yourself, well, Jesus probably knew about this prophecy from Zechariah. How hard is it for Jesus to fix this? All he needed was a young donkey to ride into Jerusalem on. Surely he could eventually need that. I mean, actually, he needed the crowds to be singing and rejoicing as he went in as well. But let's just skip over that for a moment. Let's just think, well, maybe Jesus isn't the new king. Maybe Jesus isn't this Messiah, this promised anointed one. Perhaps he's just trying to convince people. Perhaps he's just trying to fool people into thinking that he is. Well, why would he do that? What comes with that? Opulence, power, wealth, status? Well, those of us who know the rest of the story knows that those things didn't happen for Jesus. The events that surrounded these events didn't follow with fame and fortune and power. In fact, it was actually quite the opposite. And, the crowds are loving what's going on. The crowds are loving Jesus and what Jesus is about. And they've loved the miracles and all the things that he's performed. And they're happy to praise him and worship him and to, sing and to dance and to say these things that are saying that he's the Messiah. But the religious leaders, the religious authorities weren't so happy with what's going on. They felt threatened by it. They were challenged by it. And they say this, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Pharisees are like highly religious people. They knew the law of Moses and the Jewish law, and they lived according to it. And they understand the significance of what's happening. They understand the connotations of what these people are saying. They understand that these people are basically setting Jesus up to be the Messiah, to be the king. What they don't understand is, why would Jesus go along with this? They say, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Don't you understand what it is that they're saying? How can you go along with this? Because again, in their culture, you can't pretend or you can't be put up to be the Messiah unless you are the Messiah. Actually, that's blasphemy in their culture. And that comes with some very serious, just a result of that. I've lost the word in my mind. If you do that, actually, you can get yourself into serious trouble. You can get executed in their culture for this. So they're saying, Jesus, teacher, why are you going on with this? Why aren't you rebuking them? Surely you understand what it is that they're saying. And they're expecting Jesus to say, yes, okay, calm down, everybody. I'm not the Messiah. I'm not these things. So they're a bit irritated. They're a bit irate now. What Jesus says next really puts the cat amongst the pigeons. He says, "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." If these people, if the crowd keep quiet, the stones will cry out. That is some statement. Jesus is saying to the religious leaders, the religious authorities, he's saying to anybody who can hear, I am the Messiah. I am the anointed one. I am the king. I am the promised one. But he's taking it a step further. He's saying, I'm all of those things, but I'm God. I'm divine. This refrain about creation singing praises to God happens throughout the Bible. We read it time and time again. And by Jesus saying, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. He's saying, I'm what these people are saying I am, and I'm more. I am God. And of course, the religious authorities didn't like this. And they began to plot even more about how do they put a stop to Jesus? How do they stop this new movement and all the stuff that Jesus is about? And it's things like this that led to Jesus being arrested and being executed. And we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks' time. And so the story in Luke, or the narrative in Luke, changes. So this sort of scene ends, and we see Jesus carrying on into Jerusalem. And what happens next, actually, again, is surprising. It's not something you'd expect of someone making this triumphant entry that's all about their power and their status as king. We read this. It says, as he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. Why did he do that? This isn't something that a con man would do. This isn't something that somebody who's trying to fool people into thinking that they were the Messiah, that they were the king would do. As he walked into Jerusalem, as he approached the city, he weeps over it because he's moved by the city. He knows the story of Jerusalem. But more than that, he's thinking about the people, the individuals that are part of this great city. And he's moved because he knows where they've come from. He knows what's happened to them, but he also knows what's about to happen to them. There's often a lot of talk about all the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Apparently there's about 300 prophecies that point to Jesus about being the Messiah, about him being the king that he fulfilled. And you can read about it, you can Google it. But the thing that we often don't think about is the prophecies that Jesus made. And he goes on to make this amazing prophecy. He says this. He said, and even you had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it's hidden from your eyes. And the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. And so Jesus proclaims this over this nation, the city of Jerusalem. And in about 40 years' time, in AD 70, the city of Jerusalem was besieged by the Roman Empire, by the Roman army, under the watch of General Titus. And it was in April time when they sort of surrounded the city, and they let people come into the city. So there's many, again, pilgrims making their way to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover that happened again at this time of year. So they let people into the city, but they wouldn't let anybody leave. And they wouldn't let any supplies, they wouldn't let any food or water get in. And so the population of Jerusalem swelled and swelled and swelled. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. But no supplies were coming in. Nobody was allowed out. And they were completely encircled. They couldn't go anywhere. And, just the challenges and the difficulty that happens with that. And then in about August, they break through these massive city walls, and the army sweeps through the city of Jerusalem in. And, they destroy the temple, they destroy the western wall, they set things alight, and according to the Jewish historian Josephus, they massacred about 1.1 million people. And that probably is an exaggeration because there wouldn't have been that many people in Jerusalem at that time. But actually, the impact of this was devastating for the nation of Israel and certainly for the city of Jerusalem. This is a picture of what it's like in Jerusalem at the moment. These are some of the stones that were pushed over from the temple, over the wall into the valley. These big, huge, massive stones where they just destroyed all of those things that are there. And that's left today as just a memory, a reminder of those events. They didn't leave a stone on top of another. Jesus described these events, 40 years earlier, and Luke's writing about this. He's recording all of this stuff after it's happened. He's writing about who Jesus is and what Jesus has done after Jesus had done all of these things, after Jesus had been crucified and resurrected and ascended to heaven. He's recording this, and he's telling us that Jesus is moved by the city. He's moved by what's about to happen because he cares for the city. He cares for these people. He deeply cares. But the thing that I don't understand is, why does Luke not refer to the siege of Jerusalem as he's writing it down? Why do none of the Gospels refer to this? Surely you'd put like a footnote in. If you were writing this down and you've written this prophecy about what Jesus has said about what would happen, surely you would add something in like, these events unfolded during the siege of Jerusalem, perhaps in AD 70. You'd add that fact in for the other people, but Luke doesn't do that. He's just written about what Jesus has said, about what will happen, and all of those things unfolded. Why doesn't he tell us that this happened? And the simple reason is because, when Luke wrote this, the siege hadn't happened at this point. That's the only reason I can understand that. There's no reference whatsoever about that. Jesus predicted these events, and he was absolutely spot on with what was about to happen. So what does that mean? I mean, what does that say to us about who Jesus is and what Jesus is about? Well, let's compare again King Charles's coronation with Jesus' triumphant entry. And I couldn't find an accurate picture. I could only find Swedish Jesus. There always seems to be Swedish Jesus pictures. You know, Jesus probably would not have been in a white robe back then. He certainly wouldn't have had long blonde flowing hair and been, white. He would have been dark-skinned. And actually, we're told one of the prophecies about Jesus is that there's nothing about his physical appearance that would set him apart from anybody else. So you wouldn't even notice that there's anything special about him just to look at him. He would have been a normal, everyday, humble-looking person. And as we think about, these events of this coronation last year, we know, whatever we think about it, whether we agree with it or not, we know that this is designed to make a statement, to say to the people, take note, there's a new king on the scene. Recognize the power and the wealth of this great nation of ours. And so too, these events on that triumphant entry are designed to set a scene, to make a statement about who Jesus is and what Jesus was about. But here's a thought for you. If we fast forward 2,000 years, will we still be talking about this? No, we won't, because we won't be here. But will people still be talking about the coronation of King Charles in 2,000 years' time? I doubt it very much. Of course it'll be recorded in history, but I doubt people will be talking about it. The fact that we are even aware of this guy from a seemingly nowhere place, a backwater place in Galilee, 2,000 years on, events that happened, almost 2,000 miles away, the fact that we know about it and that we're talking about it is amazing in itself. The fact that 2,000 years on from this event, people are still declaring him to be the Messiah, to be the King, to be God. People are still worshiping him and dedicating their lives to him is amazing. If Jesus was a con man, if Jesus was just trying to convince people that he was the Messiah, would we still be doing that? Would we still be talking about that? There's been there's been loads of people throughout history who've tried to set themselves up as, even the Messiah in Jewish history, but throughout set themselves up as a person of power and significance. And for most of them, we don't even know about that. They're forgotten in history, but somehow we still know about Jesus. How does that make sense? How would that stand the test of time if he was lying all the time? And actually, if he wasn't the Messiah, and if he was just trying to fool people into thinking he was the Messiah, well, what does that say about Jesus? Lots of people say, there's so much evidence that Jesus lived. You can't really deny that. To deny that is to deny all of ancient history. There's loads of evidence that this person called Jesus lived. But there's a bunch of people who say about Jesus that, I don't believe that he's God. I don't believe that he's the Son of God, that he's the Messiah. I just believe he was a good man. He was a moral teacher. He was a wise person. Jesus clearly says, I'm the Messiah. He clearly says, I am God. If he was conning people, if he was trying to convince people that he was somebody that he wasn't, that doesn't make him a good man. It doesn't make him a moral teacher. It makes him evil. So surely that can't be the case that's going on. So perhaps Jesus still isn't the Messiah. Perhaps he isn't the Son of God. But he really thought he was. Perhaps he was deluded, and he just thought, like everybody else thought, that he was the Son of God, that he was divine and all those things. But again, does that make sense? Because why would we still be talking about him? Why would many people, billions of people, be worshipping him? Why would we have reset the clocks on his birth if he was deluded, if he was a madman? That doesn't make sense. For me, the only thing that makes sense is that this guy must be God, that Jesus must be who he says he is, that Jesus must be who the crowd was saying he is, that he is the Messiah, he is the anointed one, that he is God himself. And that, leads us to a question. Well, if that's true, well, what does that mean for me? And what does it mean for you? There was a quite contentious thing that happened in the coronation of King Charles, where we were given the opportunity to pledge allegiance to him. And there's lots of debate about that, where people saying, well, I'm not going to do that because he's not my king. And people talking about, well, will I pledge allegiance to the king? And within the ceremony, there was opportunity for people who were in the congregation, but also people watching at home, to make this pledge of allegiance. I swear that I will pay true allegiance to your majesty and to your heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God. And I don't know whether you remember that. I don't know whether you said that or not. And to be honest, I don't really know what difference that makes to who I am or to my life, that if I do that. And this was just about an opportunity for us to acknowledge that Charles is our king. What about Jesus? Who do you think Jesus is? Is Jesus just a con man? Is he just a madman? Or is he God? Is he who he says he is? Is he who he claims to be? Is Jesus your king? And if he is, so what? To acknowledge Jesus as our king is about putting ourselves in a place of humility before him, where we acknowledge who he is and who we're not. That we right-size God and we right-size Jesus, that we're not equal to him, that we put ourselves below him and we look up to him, that we seek to worship him and to be obedient to him, that we seek to follow him, that we seek to trust him. To acknowledge Jesus as our King, as our Messiah, as the Anointed One, as God himself, is about actually putting ourselves in that right place before him and surrendering our will to his will. Jesus is King of God's kingdom, and he invites us to be citizens of that kingdom. And to do that actually means that we acknowledge, yeah, you're in control, not me. How often do we do that? Maybe you've been a follower of Jesus for many years. You've been on this journey for years. How often do you still seek God and seek Jesus to bless you and the plans that you have, that you want God to get on board with your will? If Jesus really is our king, then it means for us actually getting our will out of the way and saying, your will be done. I want to align myself with your plans. I want to align myself with your purposes. I want to be about the things that you're about. I want to live the life that you would have me live, rather than going after all the things that I want. I don't want you to bless my plans and bless my ideas. I want you to help me get myself in line with you and who you are and your plans and your ideas. That's what it means to actually acknowledge that Jesus is our King. It's not just some empty statement that we say and then carry on living our lives and it makes no impact whatsoever. To acknowledge Jesus as our King, to acknowledge Jesus as our God, should impact absolutely everything there is to impact about us. What we think, what we say, what we do, our actions, our attitudes, and our values, how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us, how we interact and react with the people that we come into contact with. All of these things should be impacted and influenced by that acknowledgement that Jesus is my King. And we had this opportunity to take a pledge of allegiance to King Charles. I wonder whether we need an opportunity to make a pledge of allegiance to Jesus as our King. Let's get the band back up on stage. And we're going to do that for a moment. Hopefully when you came in, you received one of these bookmarks. You remember bookmarks? When you had paper and you put them in. And I've just pulled together a pledge of allegiance to Jesus. And just grab it. There's some at the back, hopefully, if you haven't got any, or if you came in late and didn't receive one. And just have a quick scan of this, because what I'm going to ask you to do in just a moment is to stand with me if you want to make this pledge and to say it. But to not just say it like we say this one, and then carry on cooking eggs and just ignoring and making no impact. That actually, this is something that should impact who we are. Should impact how we see God. Should impact the things that we do and how we live our lives. And that opportunity to do that, to actually to make ourselves right before God and to align ourselves with Him and what He is about. Because Jesus is my King. Whatever we think about the monarchy and all of those sort of things, I'm not here to make any statements about that. But I am here to make a statement that Jesus is my King. And that impacts who I am. It impacts what I do. It impacts my priorities in my life. It impacts the way that I try and live my life. It impacts the person that I want to become and how I want to be. It impacts everything there is to impact about me. So if you want to make that statement with me, make that pledge, I invite you just to stand to your feet with me now. And we're going to read it out together. This might be a bit odd. It might be a bit strange. It's on the screen as well if you can't see it very well on here. And if you want to do this, I just encourage you to say it with meaning. It's not just about reciting words on a screen. This is about actually proclaiming truth that impacts who we are and how we live our lives. You ready? I pledge my allegiance to Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior of the world, whose love is limitless, whose grace is boundless, and whose mercy endures forever. I pledge to follow his example, to love my neighbor as myself, to show compassion to those in need, to seek justice for the oppressed, and redemption for all those who are lost. I pledge to honor his name, to live with integrity and humility, and to strive for righteousness in all things. I pledge my heart, my soul, and my life to serve him faithfully, to worship him completely, and to seek his kingdom until it is fully and finally revealed. In Jesus' holy and precious name, amen.